We're going to next be hearing work from Chris Hammond. He's the Bill and Kathy Osborne Professor of Computer Science at Northwestern. Chris has done a lot of really interesting research on AI, both from the user response side and from the machine creation side. And today he's going to share some of his work in this area with all of us. So round of applause for Chris.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. This is going to be. First of all, I've been having a fabulous time. I've had one person think I was a journalist, another person think I was a lawyer, which from a computer science point of view is excellent. That means they think I have some communication skills. Today's going to be an interesting challenge for me because there is a particular role I play now, and I don't think I had ever given a talk based upon that role. It'll be. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. And we'll talk a little bit about science at the very end. Okay. Again, I have a new kind of role in my life, and I have to tell you, it used to be when I would give a talk like this, I would always frame it with these two particular roles that I have. And that is, on one hand, I'm a professor of computer science at Northwestern. I do work in artificial intelligence. I have done work in artificial intelligence as long as I have lived. And I cannot remember a time when I was not doing work in artificial intelligence. It's an odd sort of thing. Even when I was a child, one of the first short stories I read was "I Do Everything Teddy Tells Me," about a robotic teddy bear that was part of the structure of the moral teaching of children across the world to make sure that they always did the right thing. And this one child was given a teddy bear that did not stop him from thinking about murdering someone, so an entire group of people could use him as a weapon. It was a lovely story, but that's what I grew up with. But it's important that when you think about me in that role, you can't work in artificial intelligence your entire life and not have some basic beliefs. And one of my core beliefs is that there is no aspect of human cognition, zero aspect of human cognition, that we will not bring to the machine. Consciousness, creativity, emotion, intuition, we'll bring those off the machine. And some people might not believe that. And I realize I'm violating a rule that I give to students, and that is always get everyone on your side. It's not clear that that'll get you on my side. Who here actually believes that artificial intelligence, that the actual modeling, the complete modeling of all aspects of human cognition can be brought to the machine? Who believes that? Okay. So to believe otherwise, and it's fine to believe otherwise, is to think that there is some aspect of human cognition that is outside of the realm of causation. Because that's all the machine is. It's a cause machine. Right? We'll bring it there. That means that human cognition can't be modeled. We can't actually ever express how it works. Right? And I'm fine for people to believe that. I actually tend to believe that human beings are machines, but that's because I like building them. But I want to keep that idea in your head. There is no aspect of human cognition that cannot be brought to the machine. On the other side, there's a role that I no longer play because we sold it. I was chief scientist and co-founder of a company called Narrative Science, and I took leave from the university to spend time with the company. And I got to tell you, if you wake up in the morning and you're thinking, "Oh, there's no aspect of human cognition that cannot be brought to the machine," no aspect. What's the wall as you're showering and washing your hair, and you go in and you talk to the engineering team and you use language like that, you will mess your company up. Because they'll be like, "Oh yeah, let's work on those things that Chris is talking about." And it's like, "No, I don't want you to do that. What I want you to do is we have a product, and we have clients, and we have delivery dates, and we have to focus on actually building the best product for our clients to optimize the return on their investment in us. So those two things are in my head all the time. And narrative science, by the way, normally I would tell you a little bit about narrative science technology. I'm not going to really tell you about it today, but I'll give you a hint of what it is. Narrative science is a language generation, has a language generation system called Quill. And what Quill does is it takes data, that is the raw data that is a sort of structured relational database data, things like data that you get from Salesforce. It looks at that data, figures out what's going on in the world, and tells you about it. That is, it explains the world to you through the lens of the data it has. It doesn't tell you about the data. It's not a visualization. What it does is it tells you about the world. But it uses that data as a way to tell you about the world, which is to say it's functionally playing the role of what you would normally think of as a data scientist. And I'm a huge believer in this, and the current work I do is an extension and amplification of this. But these used to be the only things I had to worry about. And what was nice, though, was that when I'm thinking about AI, I actually ended up having to talk to a lot of people in the world, which is say a lot of people at companies. We were doing a ton of work in fintech, and so I would talk to people. I would talk to banks a lot about their data, about what we could do for them, and what they thought of AI. Particularly in the early days, the question I got all the time was, what should our AI strategy be? And to the earlier talk, the question for me always was, what do you want to do with it? That turned into a mantra for me. It's like, what do you want to do? What do you want? What do you need? Not what the technology is. And that actually ended up informing a lot of my thinking on the pure science side. We sold narrative science, oddly enough, to Salesforce. But I went back to the university slightly before we sold the company. While I was still at the company, I had a wonderful opportunity. And this is now the slide that is the replacement for that slide that you just saw. I had a wonderful opportunity to work for UNIDIR, which is the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, on policy issues having to do with autonomous lethal devices, which is a slightly technical way of saying killer robots. And the goal of the work was not to develop policy, but to figure out how we could explain the issues to the people who were going to develop policy. Because they had the mental models of the people, of the policymakers, of what a robot could or could not do, what a system could or could not think, was based upon watching Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. So you think about it as the Terminator, and that's about it. The thing that I found fascinating about the conversations that we had, I was the only technologist in the room. And at one point, we were going through some scenarios, and I said, "Oh yes." And at that point, you've dropped the device in the ocean, and it's moving around for 6 months, and then it looks at a possible target, and it decides whether or not to fire. And everyone in the room looked at me and said, "Decides? Machines don't decide." And it's like, yeah, they do. They do all the time. They're not decisions that you care about, maybe, but they are making decisions all the time. And the moment you decide that you think the machine can't decide, that's the moment where you lose control over it. Because you think it's not deciding, and it is. The other thing I found unbelievably fascinating was, at one point, there was a discussion of proportional response, so that in the midst of a conflict, one side attacks the other, and you have to figure out how to respond. and there was a clear consensus, except for one guy in the room, that you didn't want a machine to do that, because you did not want a machine. It would somehow undercut human dignity to have a machine decide how it was going to respond to an attack, how you were going to respond to an attack. The how do I put it? The attitude was that this was something humans had to do. The one guy who disagreed with this was one military guy who laughed, and he said they were equations. We have equations. We don't want human beings making these decisions, because when you're attacked, you're angry, and it's the fog of war, and you will now respond in a way that is absolutely out of proportion unless you have controls. And the way we have controls is we decided that we have, he was a NATO guy, we decided we would have equations. We would work the numbers and make sure that we stayed to the numbers. And although we all wanted, people wanted to have something beyond that, we want those numbers. And he looked at me and said, but the machine could just do that, right? I was like, yeah. And so the notion of the machine not doing certain things because it would diminish the value of life meant that we were thinking of actually scenarios in which more lives would be lost because we respected them so much. But that was a year-long gig, and it was unbelievably rewarding in terms of understanding how people think about AI. So then I went back to university, and I reestablished my lab, C3, Cognition, Creativity, and Communication. That's our focus. You notice there's no computation in there. Computation we see as an instrumental tool for these things. And that was fine. I was happy. And then my dean noticed that I'd spent a lot of time talking to business people and explaining AI to them. And we started a new program at Northwestern called CS plus X. And that was the idea that we would actually start hiring people in joint positions in computer science and other fields. And he wanted a faculty lead to help guide it. And this was another interesting moment for me, and that is, I was sitting around a table with the senior faculty, and this was announced, and it was lovely. One by one, each faculty member said that they had a very clear idea about where to go. People who worked in education thought we should go to education. People who worked in communication think we should work in communication. People who worked, and it's like, yes. And they had names of people we should hire who they'd written papers with. And then he hit me, and I said, I have no idea. I guess what I'd do is I'd just wander around the university, and I'd ask people, what do you want? Where do you want to go? And so I got the job. I didn't really want the job. So as a result, I started spending a lot of time over at Kellogg, and really thinking in terms of what it was that the business school wanted to teach, and what businesses were looking at in terms of both the products that they needed and the education that they needed. And that actually ended up in something we'll see in a moment. That ended up with me realizing that there was a model of functional understanding of what AI is about that was very different from the technical model. The technical model is I'll teach you how gradient flow works, and I'll teach you the math. And by the way, you will, if you're a product person or above, you will never use it, but I will teach it to you. That's the technical view. The functional view is we will talk about different algorithms, how they are used, when they are used, what the requirements are in terms of what you need to know before you can run them, and how they go south on you. So if you have a neural approach to evaluating whether or not someone's going to get a home loan, at some point you'll realize why we use the phrase hidden layers. In neural nets, that is, they're hidden. That is, that you can't figure out
exactly what features were used in determining a yay or nay. And when somebody asks you how you came to that conclusion, you will say, I don't know, and they will sue you. And it was like, that's what's going to happen, so don't do that. But it was this functional notion that ended up being important in terms of thinking, in terms of educating them. And then we started working with the med school that has all the things that you would expect in terms of computation and AI in particular, particularly on the image side. The School of Journalism, which ironically was the first place I had been working with before going off with the company, because the core technology behind the company was actually developed in concert with the School of Journalism. And then the law school. And the law school I find particularly meaningful because the law has yet to be completely disrupted, but it will be. And there is a cautionary tale that comes from journalism, which can be applied to the law school, and that is technology destroyed, and it's coming back, but destroyed so much of what was good about journalism, that is editorial control. And in the law, it's because of the technology of similarity. In the law, we have a similar possibility looming based upon the technologies of prediction. Prediction in the law could be really powerful and good. It could also be devastating in terms of the core values of the law. So, not to pound on this. Of course, the School of Communication is where our group having to do with technology and society lives, and a lot of our HCI people live. Education, mainly because we're looking at it from the point of view of how data can be used to improve the educational processes, and then the rest of engineering. With all of these, there was this realization that there was a kind of way of thinking about AI, not in terms of the core technology, but the impact of the core technology, what those technologies meant to people, and how they could disrupt fields, and how you need to control that disruption, how you need to think in terms of not only the goal of a system you're building, but the values that surround that system, the values of the field. And as I said, for law, the issue is really for law and prediction. Everyone's very excited about the technology that's actually relatively easy to build, and that is if you can get data on if you can get court data on arguments before a particular court, and everybody says a court, but they mean a judge. If you can get data on arguments in front of a judge, and you get the outcomes, you can actually do analysis of the lexical structure of the arguments that are made, the responses from the judge, and you can uncover bias. That is, you can figure out those places where judges are making biased decisions. And that sounds really powerful. And the exciting thing for many attorneys is that you can now weaponize that. And you can use an understanding of a judge's bias to actually shape arguments. And that undercuts one of the abiding principles of our legal system, which it's a promise we don't keep, and that is equitable justice. Because that means that people who can actually afford technologies that can help them shape arguments, they will win more often than the people who don't. Also, taking a look at predictive technologies in terms of looking at your client possibilities, and if you have a predictive technology that can tell you who's going to win and who's going to lose, you can make decisions about who you're going to take on. And if you if you look at regulatory enforcement, regulatory processes, you can actually tell your clients what laws how far they can push before they're going to get in trouble. And you can do that at scale with the technology of prediction. And the only way you can stop that is if somebody says, let's not do that. Somebody says, let's not do that. Now the question is, who's going to say that? Engineers are not going to say that because, honest to God, if I can build it, I'll build it. I'm happy to, and I'm progressive. The people on the law side, they don't immediately see the implications of the technologies. And what came to me in terms of all these interactions was that for every single one of these, in order to move technology into these worlds, we need aggressive partnerships. Aggressive partnerships. And when I say partnerships, I don't mean, for example, the law looking at technology and either thinking about it in terms of policy or thinking about it in terms of the rules and regulations. I mean genuine partnerships where technologists and legal scholars and legal practitioners are working together and working to solve problems and to make sure that in the solving of those problems we don't violate the values. So that was that. And then somebody had the brilliant idea that we should have a Master of Science in Artificial Intelligence. There was nobody else, so I had to do it. And then, because I've been doing this, and then I was working with Kellogg, someone had the great idea that we would have a new program, MBAI, a Master of... one of my very dear friends, Manuela Veloso, who's currently, she directs AI research for JP Morgan Chase. She refused to be on our advisory board because it was MBAI and I was small. And we were like, no, it's a branding issue. It's a branding issue. And he was like, no, it makes it feel like you don't have enough respect for AI. And I had to say, we don't. I love her dearly. I work with her, but it was like, no, we're doing something. But this was the embodiment of a functional notion of AI. That is, these students they're MBA students. They all learned a program, but they'll never be developers. Never. And I say this to them over and over again. You're not going to be a developer. And if you think you're going to be a developer and you go in and you talk to your developers, they will rip you apart because they've been doing this since they were 8 years old. Right? And the fact that you learned Python 6 months ago is not impressive to them. But if you can talk about a product need, a company need, and you can map it down to an approach that you think they should take, and you can have a conversation with them about that they'll have some respect for. And oddly enough, we're doing capstone projects where these kids and those kids work together on single projects to teach them how to sort of combine their thinking. And then we just thought, let's just build an organization that's about artificial intelligence across Northwestern to start doing some matchmaking with technologists and people who have problems. And then something that's relatively recent. And the reason I'm here, or actually the emphasis was wrong. The reason I'm here, I started working with a fellow named Jim Gushka, who's been here before. And in particular, we started working on something that he turned into a fellowship at CASBIS at Stanford on what would it mean to model AI, not as independent systems, but as systems that are designed to be working in coordination with human beings. And it's not the same as human-centric AI. It just sort of has we're doing this for you. It's more thinking about the human being as part of the system, which means that when you start thinking about things like bias in a model, then that bias could actually be compensated for by the human if you actually build things right. And there's case after case after case of how you can actually make this interaction go. And so we've been working on that, and we actually have a white paper which has just come out through the Rockefeller Foundation, who funded a convening, as they call them, they're one of my favorite organizations in the world right now, convening in Bellagio, and not Bellagio, the casino, Bellagio, the city in Italy. And they do this thing where it's like, well, I'll have you go there for a week, and there'll be no distractions aside from the beauty of the city. And I was like, okay. But as a result of this, we've come up with a model of hybrid AI that we're actually moving forward on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're responding to this in a moment. So that's a replacement for that first intro slide. By the way, this entire talk is a prequel. What, 5 minutes? Okay. Oh. All right, so that's a lot of hats. But they actually all converge. And they converge in two ways. One is stop thinking about, and this is an important thing because we've had, AI is this, AI is that. AI is what we make it. It's an artifact, damn it. I mean, you don't look at a car and go, well, cars have 4 doors. No, they have 4 doors if we design them to have 4 doors. I mean, AI is whatever it is we want it to be, whatever it is we can design, whatever it is we can create. And from my perspective, that means certainly everything in the world of machine learning, everything in the world of data analytics, natural language processing, knowledge representation, an actual representation of the way of the world. Common sense reasoning, human-computer interaction is a massive part of it. But also, I think, primarily work in human cognition and understanding the skills and deficits of humans, and I have to, again, particular attitudes towards that, and mindful change management. That is how you can actually bring AI and AI systems to work in coordination with not just the individual, but with organizations and with workflow. And it's not just AI anymore. It's something different. And it's trying to bring these different areas together and really create an idea of, or a model of integrated intelligence. There is this odd thing where for human beings, we don't think that intelligence exists in a vacuum for human beings. Why would we think it's going to exist in a vacuum with the machine? The machine is going to have to interact with us. And in doing so, it's got to be able to communicate with us, it's got to be able to work with us, it's got to be able to take instruction from us, guidance from us, while also guiding. The second thing in terms of convergence is that we need something new. And that's a science of impact. And this is really, and this is from a computational point of view. As we look at different fields and what we're doing in them, we need to be able to genuinely, from a scientific point of view, understand how we are going to change those fields and what those changes are going to look like. So there's one more element here, and I'll have one story, and it's probably going to be it for me, and that's Underwriters Laboratories. So do you know who Underwriters Laboratories is? All right. So I'm looking around this room. There are probably at least two dozen devices that have a UL stamp on it. Underwriters Laboratories that's a company that tests wires. And I was struck by this is actually a metaphor I love, by it's like why are they important here? I was struck by the reference to AI is the new electricity. I absolutely agree it's the new electricity. And I don't know if you remember this, but 128 years ago, at the Chicago Expo, there was a real rollout of electricity. It wasn't Edison, because Edison wanted direct current, and it's way dangerous. It wasn't Tesla, because everybody, even at the time, thought Tesla was crazy. It was Westinghouse. So Westinghouse ran wires to light up lights, to cool down, to create ice, to have engines, motors running. It was fantastic. And it was clearly the beginning of the new age. Does anyone know what happened at the Expo?
No. That was the fire.
Wires heated up. They burst into flame. 12 people died. 12 people died. In the rollout of the greatness of electricity, Now, when that happened, there was no real discussion about the ethics of electricity, the responsibility about electricity, transparency having to do with electricity. But there was the notion we had to make it safe. And the notion was very specific. This is a technology that can change the world. It can change the world. But we have to figure out how to make it safe. And to make it safe, it's not just the advent of electrical engineering as an area. It was, you have to care about material science. You have to care about utilization. Where the wire's going to be run. You have to care about architecture. You have to care about the use loads on these things. It goes well beyond electricity as electricity into electricity as playing a functional role in the world. And that's what UL wants. So UL it has an odd organizational structure. It is a not-for-profit that owns a for-profit. The for-profit is very for-profitable. And they've just moved a ton of money, and $1.8 billion into their not-for-profit. And they want to have research, expand research initiatives in particular areas. And one of them is digital. But they had no idea how to do that. They actually, when they approached me, they said, "Do you want to do a workshop?" And I was like, "Sure, but why?" And they were like, "Well, we want to walk into this area." And I was like, "Do you know what you're doing?" Like, "No." And I was like, "No, then I don't want to do a workshop for you. But I will help you figure out what the roadmap looks like." So we spent about a year and a half having conversations, actually having workshops, the design to build out a roadmap for a roadmap for what we're going to do based upon this mission. And we ended up forming CASM, Center for Advancing Safety and Machine Intelligence. And so CASM's mission is to develop best practices for the design, development, and deployment of machine intelligence that is safe, equitable, and beneficial. Safe. Does no harm. That is, for me, that's the center of it all. It does no harm. And unlike thinking about it in terms of, oh, we want to get rid of bias in algorithms and models, it's like, yeah, that's great. I also want to get rid of bias. But in fact, I also understand you can't. But you can control it and understand it. And the way you've got to think about this is like there's a world of data and how it's gathered. And there are 1,000 problems that happen in the data gathering process. Algorithmic decisions you make over and over again cause problems in terms of the way you train, the way you test. When you build a model, it's going to be deployed someplace and people are going to have to interact with it. And you can have a brilliant model and horrible interactions. And I have an example of not a brilliant model, but a horrible interaction. It's the compass system. That is the parole that's being used to make value judgments about parole. Aside from the fact, what it does is it gives you a number having to do with the likelihood that a prisoner is going to commit crimes again, a recidivism number. It's racist. And they kind of accept that, and they're using it. And everyone's like, oh yeah, we have to get rid of the bias there. And for me, it's like, imagine a moment where I had a box, and it could tell you for sure whether or not, the likelihood someone's going to commit a crime again while you're paroling, where you're thinking about paroling. And it's perfect. It's perfect. You want to use that box? It's like, well, yeah, we want to limit crime. It's like, no, the parole process is not about limiting crime. The parole process is about actualizing prisoners, actualizing their lives, actualizing the human potential. And so you have to interact with it in different ways. So the whole world of interaction is huge for me, and then evaluation. And there's more. I had thought this was going to be short. Yeah. I'm very excited because yesterday we sent out, we're now funding 13 projects across the country on the order of $250,000 project that's aimed at looking at research problems within that framework. And my last thing in terms of a pitch for you is that we're hiring postdocs. We have quarter-long prime projects where anyone wants to come visit us with some people that they don't normally interact with. And we're doing a set of focused workshops, which we would love to have you
help suggest topics for it. And our next one is in January, looking at the definition of what is safe.